Hey guys, welcome back. Today I want to talk about something that I lay awake at 3 a.m. thinking about now instead of sleeping, because apparently when the baby finally does decide to sleep again, I now have insomnia and don't know how to sleep. Anyway, I was thinking about something last night or this morning, that my partner and I were talking about last night. He was saying he really realizes that he's triggering himself and then getting frustrated in that triggered state at other people for basically behaving the way he knew they were going to behave. And I thought about that and I realized that I've never actually said it that way, but I was in the same place. When you first start beginning trauma work, especially, you tend to, especially if you're still working or around a lot of other people that are also constantly triggering you, you tend to put yourself in these situations by habit almost. So for me, I was thinking back and I realized that at the time that I first realized that I needed to do trauma work, I had been in a very depressed state. I was struggling with daily tasks. I was working at the time for my dad as an assistant, like an administrative assistant slash accountant, and I was not really qualified for any of those jobs, but I specifically took the job because my grandmother had been doing it and I wanted to remove that stress from her life because I felt like it was affecting her and my dad's relationship. And I thought I could step in and save the day. But it turned out that the more I worked for him, the more triggered I became, until I was basically living in a constantly multi-layered triggered existence. So I was constantly living in flashback mode, and all of my experiences were in flashback, and I couldn't even operate anymore. It got to the place where I was so depressed and so exhausted mentally, emotionally, that I was struggling to do basic tasks that shouldn't be that hard and weren't that hard, but they are when you're living in flashback and you're living in a false reality and your inner critic is constantly going and never shuts up. And if it's perpetuated by someone who actually, in my case, is also a cause of a lot of my trauma, whether on purpose or not, it's just how it is, then that person is now your boss, which is again an authority figure. And even though you think that you're smart enough and mature enough to be able to go into the situation with him as an authority figure and you as an employee, technically, but you've also got the father-daughter dynamic because it's just gonna be there. And then you've got any trauma work that you've unresolved or don't even realize is existing. And it's just a perfect storm. So I have some videos on here that are private. And I was going through and watching a bunch of them and realized that they were from the time when I was first starting this work. And they were mostly made to a friend of mine before I realized that I could talk to the world. I was making videos and emailing them to a friend who was going through the same thing. And I had forgotten they were there because they're not public. So I'm not going to do a reaction to them because I'd have to splice them up because there's personal information in there. But I was realizing after our conversation last night that when I first started my trauma recovery, I was working, like I said, for my dad. I was heavily in flashback every single day. I was having panic attacks. It was the worst I'd ever had. And as soon as I recognized that this is what was happening, and the first thing I did was I thought maybe I was autistic because I was struggling with social interactions. I thought maybe it was a third culture kid thing. I thought maybe I was, I don't know. And a friend sent me a thing, said, "Do you think it's cPTSD?" And I was like, huh. I listened to a few podcasts and I was like, yep, that's me. Wow. Okay. All right. I didn't think I had issues. So then I started working on it. And the more I looked at it, the bigger a deal it became. So it got to the place where one day I'm making a video and I'm talking about some basic tasks I have to complete for my job that day. and I can't do it. I can't. Like I'm I'm tensing up. I can't move my neck. I'm like, my whole body is just, I can't move. And I'm so tense because one of my biggest flashbacks at that time was saying no. And it was never okay to say no. I had never learned how to say no. I wasn't allowed to say no growing up, really. And so I didn't know how to say no. That was part of the reason I was doing the job. It was part of the reason that I felt so powerless in every social interaction that I had to instigate or was on the receiving end of, as far as being the assistant, making the phone calls, talking to tenants, etc. I had no power in the situation, but I had to do all of the communication. So if you had an issue, I could listen to you, but I was customer service. I couldn't actually do anything about it. And I could communicate the problem to my dad, but he could choose to do something or not to do something. And if he chose to say, hey, you're going to have to let him know I can't do it, then I had to be the bad guy. So I was constantly being the bad guy on the phone, even though I also didn't really believe that it was an issue that I felt like it was an issue that should be handled. So if it had been me, I would have handled it. But because I was just the go-between, I had to say, well, he's decided not to handle it, but I'm the one who has to tell you because... Anyway, so I was living heavily in flashback. And I realized that, going back once again to what I first said, that you're constantly triggering yourself. So I kept putting myself in situations that were going to make this a thing. This was going to be a thing I had to deal with. I constantly continued to put myself in situations. I put myself in a situation with my dad that was going to potentially damage our personal relationship, that was going to cause me to constantly feel inadequate and in an impossible situation. As soon as I realized I was dealing with PTSD and I started doing trauma recovery, the symptoms got worse. At first, they got terrible. Like, I couldn't get out of bed. I was having panic attacks, rocking back and forth, holding a pillow on the couch. This is something I had never dealt with before. So things got worse before they got better. So when you're first starting out and you realize that this is happening to you, I think it is very important to recognize that, I don't know that I did at the time, but my partner is doing a very good job of that. Recognizing, you know what, I'm actually like, it's like I'm putting a brick down and then I'm tripping over it on purpose and watching to see if anybody's going to catch me, kind of a thing. He didn't give that analogy, but I just made that up. I'm so proud of myself. But so I was putting myself in a position where I couldn't win. And then every time I lost, I kicked myself. But I also kicked them for not rescuing me from the situation that I was putting myself in with them. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And insanity is where you live when you are just beginning trauma recovery and you usually feel insane. Your memories are spotty and or coming all back in one big rush, and you're horrified at the things you're remembering and you don't know how to handle all of them. Some of them are very bad memories. Some of them are memories, but clearly they've affected you. Two of my biggest things are not being able to say no and never being good enough. Those are the two things that will, like, if I feel like I'm forced into a corner and there's no way I can say no without being a really, really bad person, then I just say yes. But then I've betrayed myself, see? So I was getting phone calls at 9 o'clock at night. I had to set boundaries. I realized I had to start setting boundaries because my dad just didn't have any. He just works all the time. And if it's your business and you want to work all the time, okay, have that work-life balance. But when it's your assistant, who's also your daughter, she's in a terrible place because she wants to always be there for you and she always wants to do what you need her to do. But at the same time, she does have, at the time I had a husband, I had a house to take care of, I had a life, and I was no longer able to be dedicated 24/7 to whatever he needed and wanted. And I felt it was a very unhealthy employee-employer relationship because we were family. And because I also had a codependency from so many years of being parentified and from being all of these things that I didn't realize at the time. But I just wanted to say all of that to say I was recognizing last night that what he's saying about triggering himself is something that I think we all do, especially in the very beginning of trauma recovery, because we don't necessarily realize that we're in a flashback until we're well into it. There's never just one flashback, at least not for me. There's always multiple layers. So you're trying to sift down through and see what's happening. It's not like you get a piece of paper and you look at it and you're like, oh, that's what's wrong. It's like you get a stack of files and you're like, okay, something's wrong. And the answer is in here. I was trying to explain to my partner too, for me, triggers. For me, they're like, I have to find a needle in a haystack because everything for me was so covert, so subtle, so unspoken. For him, he gets angry. He feels frustrated. It's very outward. It's very angry. It's very out there when he's triggered. For me, I just feel inadequate, not good enough. Like I can't say no. It's a sort of general feeling. But if you don't recognize it, that if you don't recognize and learn to recognize what your trigger symptom is, then you don't know you're in it until it's too late. Anyway, so not too late, but until you're well into it. Now you've got a lot of damage control to do. So I just wanted to say, especially in the beginning, you're going to continue to trip yourself. And you know what the other people's response is going to be. But it's like you're daring them to do something different. I dare you to pick up the pieces. I dare you to do your job. I dare you not to let me take over your space and do it for you, since you're not going to do it anyway, and I know it. But I'm daring you to prove me wrong. Please prove me wrong. They're not going to. And then you're angry and frustrated. And sometimes it can put you in jeopardy. Your job, your position, your very mental well-being. You go home and it all comes out at home, and then you just didn't have a relaxing evening. That didn't happen in our case because self-awareness. Self-awareness is so key. You have to be aware of what's happening to you, to everybody around you, and to recognize how you're interacting with them and what is happening. What is actually happening? What is the reality? I'm clearly in a flashback right now. I don't necessarily always know why. He says he always knows why. He always knows why he was triggered, what the trigger is. And I said, I don't. I said, I still have to identify it a lot of times. I still don't always know. For him, apparently he knows, but it's important for him to be in the moment, to stay present, to stay self-aware, to recognize that when he's bending over backwards to help someone, and then there's no appreciation, there's no comment, thanks, there's no recognition of the effort that is being put forth that they didn't ask for, but you're doing because and then when you don't get it, then you're frustrated that once again you were not validated, but you did it to yourself basically. But it's also part of our triggers, you know. We want to be validated and accepted and appreciated so badly, and we didn't ever get that. And if we ever did, it was in an unhealthy way. So anyway, if you're tripping yourself up, you're not alone. Hang in there, stay self-aware, stay present, stay in the moment, and learn to recognize what your trigger symptom is. I get foggy, exhausted, and I feel chaotic. I feel foggy. He gets angry. He doesn't necessarily know what he's angry at, but he's angry. And I get foggy. Learn to recognize when you're in a flashback, because it changes the whole dynamic. It's like if you recognize that you're living in this world and not that one, it's like knowing if you're in the Matrix or not, because the rules change if you're in it, if you're not. Anyway, hopefully that's helpful to some of you. It's just something I've been thinking about, and thought I would say it. I think I got my point across. I feel very foggy. I might be triggered right now. Who knows? Anyway, it's become very popular to talk about triggers and to be triggered. Not not a proponent of that, but I was doing this before it was cool. So just remember that. Have a great day, guys. See you next time.
Close as I am now, I'm on my